A Bigfoot corpse. Has anyone ever found one? Could we ever find a Bigfoot body? It's the question that nobody seems to have a good answer for. Where are all the bodies? We've got thousands of sightings, hundreds of footprints, dozens of videos and audio recordings, but not a single confirmed body. Not one bone. Not a skull, at least no real one. Not even a tooth. After spending the last 15 years researching this mystery, I think I finally understand why. And the answer is more disturbing than I ever imagined. Let me start by saying I used to be a skeptic. Many years ago, I laughed at the grainy footage, dismissed the eyewitness accounts, and figured anyone claiming to have seen the Bigfoot was either lying or mistaken. That changed about 12 years ago when I myself had an encounter. That made me wonder. If these creatures exist, then why have we found no body? The more I dug into these supposed body discoveries, the more patterns emerged. There's this one clip that circulates every few years showing what appears to be a Bigfoot corpse lying in a forest clearing. The creature is sprawled out, partially decomposed, with visible bone structure and matted fur. Forensic experts I contacted said the decomposition rate looked off, too fast for something that size in those conditions. Others pointed out that the skeletal structure visible in the footage didn't match any known primate or bear. But before any real investigation could happen, the footage would be declared a hoax, usually by someone claiming to be the creator who'd used latex and foam. I've probably watched 100 of these alleged Bigfoot body videos by now. Most are obviously fake. You can see the seams in the costume, the zipper down the back, the completely wrong proportions. Some are clearly CGI with movement that doesn't match the lighting or shadows that fall in impossible directions. The recent surge in AI-generated images has made things even worse. I've seen supposedly authentic photos of Bigfoot remains that, upon closer inspection, have fingers with the wrong number of joints or fur that blends unnaturally into the background in ways that scream artificial intelligence. But here's what bothers me. Scattered among all these fakes are a handful of videos and images that I can't explain away. There's footage from what appears to be a government facility showing something large and covered in dark fur on an examination table, with people working around it. It exists in this frustrating gray area where it's impossible to prove real or fake. What frustrates me most about analyzing these videos is the pattern of interruption. So many of them cut off at crucial moments just when you'd expect to see definitive proof. The camera mysteriously malfunctions, the battery dies, something blocks the lens, or the person filming suddenly stops recording. Skeptics say this is proof of fraud, that the hoaxers know better than to show too much detail that would reveal the fake. But I wonder if there might be another explanation. What if there's some kind of interference, either deliberate or accidental, that prevents clear documentation? I've experimented with this theory myself during field research. On 3 separate occasions when I've been in areas with recent Bigfoot sightings, my electronic equipment has malfunctioned in ways that seemed almost deliberate. Cameras that worked perfectly hours earlier suddenly refuse to power on. GPS devices lose signal in ways that don't match normal satellite coverage issues. Audio recorders capture nothing but static at moments when I could swear I heard unusual sounds. Could this be coincidence? Absolutely. Could it be equipment failure due to wilderness conditions? Certainly possible. Or could there be something we don't understand about these creatures that affects electronic devices? Some researchers have proposed that the Bigfoot might emit some kind of electromagnetic field or infrasound that interferes with recording equipment. There's precedent for animals producing infrasound. Elephants and whales use it for long-distance communication. Tigers produce infrasonic roars that can cause disorientation and fear in prey. If the Bigfoot has evolved similar capabilities, either for communication or defense, It could explain why clear, undisputed footage is so rare. The equipment fails not because someone's faking it, but because the subject itself creates conditions that prevent proper recording. What would a real Bigfoot body actually look like? I've thought about this constantly, based on consistent eyewitness descriptions and the few pieces of physical evidence we have. Hair samples, dermal ridges on footprint casts, bite marks on trees. I've built a mental picture. The creature would likely stand 7 to 9 feet tall when upright, with a robust skeletal structure to support considerable weight. The skull would be conical or sagittal, possibly with a pronounced brow ridge. The arms would be proportionally longer than human arms, with massive hands and thick fingers. The entire body would be covered in hair ranging from dark brown to reddish brown to black, except possibly the face, palms, and soles of the feet. But we don't have any of this. We have nothing. And that's where things get interesting. See, I started thinking about what happens when other large animals die in the wilderness. Bears, elk, mountain lions, we find their remains all the time. Hikers stumble across skeletons, hunters find carcasses, park rangers document the locations. Nature has a cycle, and part of that cycle is visible death. So why not the Bigfoot? Why does this creature seem to vanish completely when it dies? The government cover-up theory is the obvious first stop. The idea goes that any time a Bigfoot body is discovered, federal agents swoop in, confiscate the remains, and silence witnesses. I'll admit there's something appealing about this explanation. It's clean, it accounts for the missing evidence, and it fits our cultural suspicion of government secrecy. I've interviewed people who claim to have witnessed these interventions. They describe black SUVs appearing within hours of a discovery. Men in suits who don't identify themselves but carry federal badges and threats of legal action if anyone speaks about what they saw. One guy I talked to, a retired forest ranger from Washington State, told me about finding what he swore was a Bigfoot skeleton in a remote canyon. He said he radioed it in through proper channels, planning to have a research team examine the site. But before any one official arrived, a helicopter landed nearby. And a team he didn't recognize loaded the bones into cases and flew away. When he asked his superiors about it later, they claimed no record of his call existed. He told me this in a whisper, looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to burst through the door and drag him away. But here's my problem with the government cover-up theory. It requires an impossible level of coordination and secrecy. We're talking about vast wilderness areas across multiple states and countries. Are we really supposed to believe that every single Bigfoot death across all this territory over decades or centuries gets intercepted before anyone can document it? That no evidence ever slips through? That not one person involved in these operations ever comes forward with concrete proof? It strains credibility. Governments can barely keep election results or budget numbers secret, but they're supposedly running a flawless operation to hide a species of large primate. There's another possibility that haunted me for years. Maybe we're not finding bodies because the Bigfoot doesn't leave any. What if these creatures have some biological quirk that causes rapid decomposition? Some species of deep-sea creatures dissolve quickly after death due to the pressure differences. Certain microorganisms can break down organic matter at accelerated rates. What if the Bigfoot has evolved a similar mechanism, perhaps as a defense against scavengers or disease? A body could theoretically decompose completely in days rather than weeks or months, leaving nothing but scattered hair and organic residue that blends back into the forest floor. I've floated this theory to biologists and forensic experts. Most are skeptical. They point out that bones don't just vanish, that teeth are incredibly durable, that even rapid decomposition leaves traces. But a few have admitted that if a creature had an unusual bacterial colony in its gut, or a particular enzyme in his tissues, accelerated post-mortem decomposition isn't impossible. It's rare, unprecedented in a creature this size, but not technically impossible. The problem is, without a body to study, we can't test the theory. Then there's the behavior angle, and this is where folklore becomes crucial. Indigenous peoples across North America have stories about these creatures going back centuries. The Salish tribes of the Pacific Northwest called them Sasquatch, meaning wild man or hairy man. The Lummi people spoke of creatures that would retreat deep into the mountains when they sensed death approaching. The Nlaka'pamux told stories of being so intelligent they would bury their own dead in secret places hidden from human eyes. I spent a summer in Northern California talking to elders from various tribes about their Bigfoot traditions. One Hoopa woman in her 80s told me that according to her grandfather's teachings, the Bigfoot knows when death is near and will separate from its family group to find a sacred burial ground. She said these places are always in the most remote, inaccessible parts of the wilderness, places humans rarely go. When I asked if she knew where any of these burial grounds might be, she just smiled and said some knowledge isn't meant for outsiders. During that same research trip, I spoke with a Yurok elder who shared a story that had been passed down through his family for at least 6 generations. He said that long ago, his ancestors witnessed what they called a walking ceremony, where a group of Bigfoot carried one of their dead toward the mountains. The creatures moved in complete silence, traveling in single file, with the body wrapped in woven grass and bark. The humans who saw this hid themselves, understanding instinctively that they were witnessing something sacred and private. The elder emphasized that his people had always known the Bigfoot buried their dead, and that disturbing these burial sites would bring terrible consequences. The Lakota people have their own traditions about a creature they call the tall man or walker of the forest. Their oral histories speak of occasions when these beings would appear to certain medicine men in visions, showing them where not to hunt, where not to build, where not to explore. The forbidden areas, according to these teachings, were places where the tall men kept their most sacred sites. Modern researchers have noted that some of these traditionally avoided areas correspond with regions that would make ideal burial grounds, remote, difficult to access, and with natural features like caves or rock formations that could protect remains from scavengers. I've collected similar accounts from indigenous cultures around the world. The Tibetan concept of the Yeti includes the belief that these creatures have death valleys high in the Himalayas where they go to die, places protected by the spirits of the mountains themselves. The Aboriginal Australians speak of the Yowie having sacred caves in the outback, locations marked by ancestral warnings that no human should approach. The Ainu people of Japan tell stories of the mountain man who guards certain valleys so fiercely that even animals avoid those areas. The consistency of these traditions across cultures that had no contact with each other is remarkable. What strikes me about all these cultural accounts is the element of taboo. It's not just that the burial grounds are unknown or unfindable. They're actively protected by cultural prohibitions against seeking them out. The indigenous peoples who have these traditions aren't simply unaware of where Bigfoot bodies might be found. They know, or at least their ancestors knew, and they've established strong social rules against revealing or disturbing those places. This suggests that at some point in the past, there was enough interaction between humans and the Bigfoot for these boundaries to be negotiated and understood. The idea that the Bigfoot might bury its dead or retreat to specific locations to die started making more sense the more I thought about it. Elephants are known to visit particular sites when they're dying, though the elephant graveyard concept is somewhat mythologized. Whales beach themselves when ill or dying. Why couldn't a highly intelligent, reclusive creature develop a similar behavior? If the Bigfoot has even a fraction of the intelligence attributed to it in eyewitness accounts, using tools, avoiding cameras, staying hidden from human civilization, then it's certainly capable of understanding death and taking deliberate steps to hide its remains. But I needed more than folklore. I needed evidence, or at least a first-hand account that I could verify. That's what led me to the Olympic National Forest 3 years ago. I'd received an email from someone who claimed to have found a Bigfoot burial site and was willing to show me its location on the condition that I never reveal the exact coordinates. I was skeptical. I get messages like this monthly, and they're almost always nonsense. But something about this one felt different. The person provided GPS coordinates for a meeting spot, geological survey data that matched the area's terrain, and a level of detail that suggested genuine wilderness knowledge. I hiked 6 miles into dense forest to reach the meeting point. The person who showed up was an older man who'd worked as a wildlife biologist for the Park Service for 30 years before retiring. He was cautious, kept checking to make sure we weren't being followed, and made me agree to several conditions before we proceeded. We hiked another 4 miles, moving deeper into terrain that clearly saw almost no human traffic. The forest became darker, the undergrowth thicker, the silence more complete. We reached a valley so remote that I couldn't find it on any map. The biologist led me to what appeared to be a natural cave system carved into volcanic rock. At the entrance, I noticed scratches on the stone, deep gouges that looked deliberate, almost like warnings or markers. Inside, the cave opened into a larger chamber, and that's where I saw them. Bones, dozens of them, scattered across the floor in various states of weathering. Some looked ancient, worn smooth by time. Others appeared more recent, still showing traces of organic matter. I wanted to collect samples, take measurements, document everything. But the biologist stopped me. He said he'd made that mistake once before, had taken a small bone fragment for analysis, and within a week, his house had been broken into. Nothing was stolen except his research notes and the bone sample. He'd received anonymous messages telling him to forget what he'd seen. That was 15 years ago, and he'd never gone back until now, brought me here only because he was dying and figured the truth mattered more than his own safety. The bones themselves told a story if you knew how to read it. They weren't scattered randomly, but arranged in distinct groupings, as if each represented an individual. The largest grouping was near the back of the cave, where the bones appeared oldest. Smaller groupings were positioned closer to the entrance, their condition suggesting they were more recent additions. This pattern implied a tradition spanning considerable time, with new remains being added while older ones were left undisturbed. The biologist pointed out that some bones showed signs of deliberate arrangement, placed in specific positions rather than simply deposited. What struck me most was the complete absence of teeth. In every grouping, there were skulls, ribs, long bones, vertebrae, but not a single tooth. This couldn't be accidental. Teeth are among the most durable parts of any skeleton, typically the last to decay or be scattered. Their systematic absence suggested they'd been deliberately removed either before or after placement in the cave. The biologist had noticed this too and speculated that teeth might hold some special significance in Bigfoot culture, possibly kept as relics or destroyed as part of a burial ritual. The cave walls showed other evidence of deliberate activity. There were marks that looked like they'd been made with rocks or bone tools, creating patterns that might have been decorative or symbolic. In one section, what appeared to be handprints, massive, far larger than human hands, had been pressed into a clay-like deposit on the wall. The biologist estimated these prints could be decades or even centuries old, preserved by the cave's stable environment. He suggested they might serve as territorial markers or memorial tributes to the dead. As we explored deeper, I noticed the cave branched into several smaller chambers. Some contained what looked like nesting materials, layers of dried grass, leaves, and moss that had been deliberately arranged. Others were empty except for small piles of stones stacked in cairn-like formations. The biologists theorized that different chambers might serve different functions within the burial complex. Perhaps some were for the recently deceased, others for long-term interment, and still others for ceremonial purposes we couldn't begin to understand. The bones were wrong. That was my first thought. They were too large, the proportions off, the skull shapes unlike anything I'd seen in comparative anatomy textbooks. But I couldn't study them properly, couldn't verify what I was seeing, because I'd given my word not to remove anything. I took photographs, over 100 of them, documenting the site from every angle. The biologist told me that in his professional opinion, these were remains of multiple individuals spanning possibly centuries, all brought to this one location deliberately. A burial ground, a sacred place that the Bigfoot had somehow kept hidden from human discovery. When I tried to show those photographs to colleagues, something strange happened. The files corrupted, every single one. The memory card that had been working perfectly failed completely the moment I returned to civilization. The biologist died 2 months later from cancer, and I never got a chance to return to that cave. I've tried to find it again multiple times, but the terrain all looks the same, and without his guidance, I'm lost. Sometimes I wonder if I really saw what I think I saw, or if my desperate desire for answers made me see patterns in random bones left by bears or other animals. But there's more to this puzzle. I started researching other cultures' legends about similar creatures. The Yeti in the Himalayas, the Yowie in Australia, the Almas in Central Asia. Every culture has a version of this story, and nearly all of them include the same detail. The creatures never leave bodies behind. The Sherpa people of Nepal say the Yeti returns to the mountain's heart to die, to places where the snow never melts and humans cannot survive. Aboriginal Australians speak of the Yowie taking its dead to sacred sites protected by the land itself. What if this behavior is universal among these creatures? What if there's an instinctual drive hardwired into their biology or culture to hide death from other species? It would explain why we find evidence of their lives: footprints, hair samples, tree structures, even occasional sightings. But never their deaths. It would make them the ultimate elusive species, visible in life but invisible in death. I've also considered the population angle. Maybe we're not finding bodies because there simply aren't that many of them to find. If the Bigfoot population is small and scattered across vast wilderness areas, the statistical chance of stumbling across a corpse becomes minuscule. Think about it. How often do you find a dead bear or mountain lion in the wild? These are animals we know exist with documented populations, and their bodies are still rarely discovered by chance. Scale that up to a creature that's far more rare, far more reclusive, and deliberately avoiding human contact, and the odds of finding remains become astronomically low. Some researchers have suggested that the Bigfoot might have an extended lifespan compared to other primates. If individuals live 50, 70, or even 100 years, then deaths would be correspondingly rare events. Combine that with deliberate burial practices and remote dying locations, and you have a perfect storm of factors that would prevent body discovery. We might be looking for something that only happens once every few decades across thousands of square miles of wilderness. There's a darker theory I've encountered in my research, one that makes me uncomfortable, but I can't entirely dismiss. What if the Bigfoot has learned to destroy evidence of its existence specifically because of human contact? Think about it from their perspective. For centuries, maybe millennia, they've watched humans expand, develop weapons, hunt other species to extinction. They've seen what happens when humans discover something new and unusual. Maybe, at some point in their collective history, they made a decision: hide everything, leave no trace that could be used against them. This would require a level of intelligence and social organization that many scientists would find hard to accept in a non-human species. But the more I study eyewitness accounts, the more I see evidence of exactly this kind of intelligence. Reports of the Bigfoot throwing rocks to scare away intruders, but only when they're getting too close to something important. Sightings that describe the creatures watching humans from a distance, studying our behavior. Instances where the Bigfoot seem to deliberately avoid trail cameras or take paths that wouldn't leave clear footprints. One account that stuck with me came from a hunter in British Columbia. He described tracking what he thought was an elk for hours, following hoof prints through the snow. The trail suddenly stopped at a creek, and when he looked across the water, he saw a massive figure watching him from the trees. The creature stared at him for several long moments, then turned and walked away, placing its feet carefully on rocks and logs to avoid leaving tracks in the snow. The hunter said it was clear the Bigfoot knew exactly what it was doing, deliberately choosing a path that wouldn't be easy to follow. If the Bigfoot is that intelligent, that aware of human tracking methods, then hiding their dead becomes not just possible, but logical. They would understand that a body represents the ultimate evidence, the proof that would end all debate about their existence. And maybe that's exactly what they don't want. Maybe they've chosen obscurity as a survival strategy. And protecting their dead is the final, most crucial part of that strategy. I've spent years trying to understand the supposed government interest in keeping Bigfoot secret. If bodies are being confiscated, if evidence is being suppressed, what's the motivation? The usual theories involve protecting the public from panic or preserving the creature as a secret military asset. But I think it might be simpler than that. If the Bigfoot were proven to exist, it would fundamentally change how we manage millions of acres of wilderness. Entire industries, logging, mining, development, would face new restrictions. The creature would likely be protected under endangered species legislation, creating massive economic and political complications. I've spoken with retired government officials who admit, off the record, that there are protocols in place for handling unusual biological discoveries in national forests. They won't confirm what those protocols are or what they might involve, but they exist. One former park ranger told me that early in his career, he was briefed on what to do if he ever encountered certain types of evidence in the field. He wouldn't tell me what those evidence types were, but he said the briefing made it clear that some discoveries were to be reported through very specific, non-standard channels. That conversation led me down a rabbit hole of researching government wildlife management policies and classified biological surveys. I discovered that certain areas of national forests and parks are designated as restricted zones with no public explanation. These aren't the usual closures for fire danger or wildlife protection. They're permanent restrictions with no visible signs or public announcements. When I tried to get information through Freedom of Information Act requests, I received heavily redacted documents that raised more questions than they answered. One document mentioned an unspecified large mammal requiring special handling, with entire paragraphs blacked out. I've also tracked patterns in helicopter activity over remote wilderness areas. On multiple occasions, researchers have reported seeing military-style helicopters in regions immediately following alleged Bigfoot sightings or discoveries. These aren't the usual Park Service or Forest Service aircraft, which are clearly marked and follow predictable patterns. The helicopters in question are unmarked, appear with no warning, and disappear just as quickly. I've spoken with enough people who've witnessed this pattern that I can't dismiss it as coincidence or imagination. One particularly troubling case involved a wildlife camera that captured what appeared to be a deceased Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest. The camera belonged to a university research team studying bear populations, and the images were discovered during routine data collection. Within 48 hours of the team discussing the images in an email marked for internal use only, their research permits for the area were revoked without explanation. The camera that captured the images mysteriously disappeared from their locked equipment storage. The university administration discouraged any further discussion of the incident, and the research team was transferred to a project in another state. I've tried to interview members of that research team, but only one was willing to talk, and only anonymously. She described the images as showing something unmistakably unusual: a large, hair-covered body lying in a forest clearing with visible signs of recent death. The proportions were wrong for a bear, the limbs too long and positioned strangely. Before the team could retrieve the camera and examine the site in person, they received the permit revocation. She believes someone was monitoring their communications and intervened specifically to prevent further investigation. Whether that someone was government, private industry, or something else, she couldn't say. These patterns of interference and suppression make me wonder if we're not finding Bigfoot bodies precisely because someone doesn't want us to. Not out of concern for the creatures themselves necessarily, but because of the implications of their proven existence. The legal complications alone would be staggering. Entire forestry operations would need environmental impact reviews. Mining claims could be challenged. Development projects could be delayed or canceled. The economic cost of acknowledging Bigfoot's existence could run into billions of dollars, affecting multiple industries and thousands of jobs. The more I investigate this question, the more I realize it might not have a single answer. The absence of Bigfoot bodies probably isn't due to one factor, but a combination of many. Small population size, extended lifespans, intelligent burial practices, rapid decomposition, difficult terrain, government intervention, and pure statistical bad luck all working together to create a perfect mystery. Each element alone might not be enough to explain the absence of remains, but together they form a nearly impenetrable barrier to discovery. I think about that cave in the Olympic National Forest almost every day. Those bones, real or imagined, represent everything we don't know and might never know. If they were genuine, if I really did stand in a Bigfoot burial ground, then it proves the creatures have a level of ritual and culture we barely suspected. It means they're not just animals, but beings with their own traditions, their own ways of honoring death, their own secrets that they've successfully kept from humanity for countless generations. But here's what really keeps me up at night. What if we're asking the wrong question? What if the absence of bodies isn't a mystery at all, but a message? What if the Bigfoot wants us to know they exist, hence the footprints, the sightings, the howls in the night? But they're drawing a very clear line at what they'll allow us to prove. The perfect balance between visibility and invisibility, between legend and reality. They let us catch glimpses, hear sounds, find tracks, but the one thing that would turn them from mystery into fact, a body, remains forever out of reach. I've accepted that I'll probably never have definitive proof. The photographs are gone, the biologist is dead, the cave is lost. But I know what I saw, and I know there's a reason we're not finding Bigfoot bodies. Whether that reason is biological, behavioral, or something we haven't even considered yet, it's effective. These creatures have managed to remain in the shadows despite living alongside humanity for thousands of years. That's not luck. That's deliberate. That's intelligence. Every few months, a new video surfaces claiming to show a Bigfoot corpse. I watch them all, analyze them, try to determine if there's anything genuine hidden among the hoaxes. Most are obviously fake, the proportions wrong, the details inconsistent, the story falling apart under basic scrutiny. But occasionally, I see something that makes me pause, a shadow in the background that's the wrong size, a reflection in a window showing something that shouldn't be there, details that might be nothing or might be everything. The advancement of AI and CGI technology has made the search both easier and harder. Easier because I can now detect digital manipulation more effectively. Harder because the fakes are getting so good that real footage, if it exists, might be indistinguishable from the manufactured evidence. We're entering an age where seeing can no longer be believing, where video and photographic proof mean less than they ever have. It's the perfect environment for something like the Bigfoot to continue hiding in plain sight. I've started teaching younger researchers about this mystery, passing on what I've learned. I tell them to question everything but dismiss nothing, to understand that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, to remember that just because we haven't found something doesn't mean it doesn't exist or that it can't be found. The ocean covers most of our planet, and we've explored less than 5% of it. We discover new species regularly. We find previously unknown tribes of humans in remote jungles. Why should the Bigfoot be different? The folklore is consistent across cultures and centuries. The Pacific Northwest tribe spoke of forest giants long before European contact. Tibetan monks carved images of the Yeti into monastery walls hundreds of years ago. Australian Aboriginal rock art depicts large, hairy humanoids alongside other native wildlife. These weren't people who could compare notes across oceans. They didn't have internet forums or international conferences. Yet they all described the same type of creature, and they all said the same thing. You might see it, you might hear it, but you'll never hold its body in your hands. There's a Salish legend about a hunter who found a dying Bigfoot in the forest. The creature was old, its fur turned white, its breath coming in ragged gasps. The hunter, moved by compassion, stayed with the Bigfoot as it died, offering what comfort he could. When the body finally grew still, other members of the Bigfoot's family emerged from the trees. They acknowledged the hunter with what he interpreted as gratitude. Then they carried their fallen family member away into the deep forest. The hunter never told anyone exactly where this happened, saying only that some places are meant to remain hidden, some rituals are meant to stay private. I think about that story often. If it's true, if something like it has happened even once, it would explain so much. It would show that the Bigfoot has a complex social structure, that they care for their dying, that they have rituals around death. It would prove they're far more than just large animals. It would make them something closer to us, something deserving of respect and privacy, something that maybe we shouldn't be trying so hard to expose. The ethical questions around Bigfoot research have become increasingly important to me. If these creatures exist and have deliberately chosen to remain hidden, do we have the right to pursue them? If they've developed effective strategies to prevent us from finding their dead, should we respect that boundary or try to overcome it? There's a colonial mindset in the idea that everything unknown must be discovered, documented, and cataloged for human knowledge. Maybe the Bigfoot represents one of the last truly wild things, and maybe it should stay that way. But I can't stop looking. It's become more than research for me. It's a calling, an obsession, a need to understand. Every unexplained footprint, every distant howl, every eyewitness account adds another piece to a puzzle that might never be complete. The absence of bodies is the center of that puzzle, the piece that everything else revolves around. Solve that mystery and everything else falls into place. Or maybe solving it would just reveal deeper mysteries, more questions, more unknowns. I've noticed that in recent years, sightings have become less frequent in areas with high human population density and more common in truly remote regions. It's as if the Bigfoot is adapting, learning, retreating further from civilization as our reach expands. If that's true, if they're that responsive to human encroachment, then their burial practices might be evolving too. Maybe the locations where they take their dead keep moving, always staying just beyond our ability to discover them. Climate change is affecting wilderness areas in ways we're only beginning to understand. Glaciers are melting, permafrost is thawing, ancient forests are burning. If the Bigfoot has been hiding its dead in specific remote locations for centuries or millennia, what happens when those locations become accessible or disappear entirely? Will we finally find the evidence we've been seeking? Or will the creatures adapt again, finding new hiding places in a changing world? I've received criticism from both sides of the debate. Skeptics think I'm wasting my time chasing fairy tales, seeing patterns in randomness, desperate to believe in something that doesn't exist. True believers think I'm too cautious, too willing to admit uncertainty, not committed enough to proving the truth. But I've learned that the truth isn't simple, isn't clean, isn't something that can be captured in a single photograph or piece of evidence. The truth is messy and complicated and full of contradictions. The question of why we can't find Bigfoot bodies has taken me to some of the most remote places on Earth. I've hiked through old-growth forests that have never been logged, climbed mountains that appear on no tourist maps, explored cave systems that few humans have ever entered. I've spent nights in wilderness so complete, so untouched by modern civilization, that I could understand how something large and intelligent could live there completely undetected. In those moments, the absence of bodies doesn't seem like a mystery. It seems inevitable. Technology keeps advancing. Drones can now access areas too dangerous or difficult for humans. Satellite imaging becomes more detailed every year. Environmental DNA testing can detect species presence from water or soil samples. Trail cameras are smaller, more sophisticated, harder to detect. You'd think this would make finding Bigfoot, or at least its remains, more likely. But the technology cuts both ways. If the Bigfoot is as intelligent as the evidence suggests, they're probably learning to avoid these new detection methods too. I've participated in several organized searches using the latest technology. We've deployed thermal imaging cameras that can detect body heat signatures through dense foliage. We've used motion-activated trail cameras with infrared night vision positioned at strategic locations identified through predictive modeling. We've collected environmental DNA samples from water sources in areas with recent sightings, looking for genetic material that doesn't match known species. Despite months of effort and thousands of dollars in equipment, we've found nothing definitive. Plenty of intriguing thermal anomalies, some unusual hair samples, occasional footprints, but never a body, never remains. One researcher I know has devoted his entire career to mapping potential Bigfoot habitat and death sites using geographic information systems and predictive algorithms. He's identified dozens of locations where, statistically, we should find remains if the creatures exist in the number suggested by sighting reports. We've investigated many of these sites, some are incredibly remote, requiring multi-day expeditions and technical climbing skills to access. Others are surprisingly close to human activity, hidden in plain sight by terrain features or thick vegetation. We've found evidence of large animal activity, structures that might be shelters or territorial markers, but never the definitive proof we're seeking. The frustration of these fruitless searches has led some researchers to abandon the field entirely. They conclude that the absence of bodies proves non-existence, that all the sightings and evidence must be misidentification or hoax. I understand their frustration, but I can't accept that conclusion. I've seen too much, heard too many consistent accounts from credible witnesses, examined too many pieces of physical evidence that don't fit conventional explanations. The absence of bodies doesn't prove non-existence. It proves successful concealment, whether deliberate or circumstantial. I sometimes wonder what would happen if we did find a body. Would it answer all our questions or create new ones? Would it protect the species or endanger it? Would the government confiscate it, study it in secret, never let the public know? Or would it become a media sensation, turning these creatures from mysterious forest dwellers into zoo specimens and research subjects? Maybe the Bigfoot's greatest gift to us is remaining just out of reach, forcing us to wonder, to imagine, to respect the boundaries of the unknown. The videos and photos will keep coming. Some will be obvious fakes, created for attention or profit. Some will be honest mistakes, people seeing bears or shadows and letting their imaginations fill in the details. And maybe, just maybe, some will be real. Fleeting glimpses of something we're not meant to fully understand. I'll keep analyzing them, keep searching for patterns, keep hoping that one day I'll see something that can't be explained away. After all these years of research, I've come to a conclusion that would have seemed like defeat when I started. I don't think we're meant to find Bigfoot bodies. I think the absence itself is the answer. These creatures have survived by being invisible, by leaving just enough evidence to confirm they exist, but never enough to pin them down. They've turned avoidance into an art form, developed intelligence and social structures, sophisticated enough to keep their most vulnerable secret, death, completely hidden from human eyes. So where are all the Bigfoot bodies? They're where they've always been, in places we can't reach, protected by behaviors we don't understand, hidden by methods we haven't learned to counter. They're in sacred burial grounds known only to their own kind. They're decomposing at rates that make discovery impossible. They're being removed by family groups before we can stumble across them. They're everywhere and nowhere, just like the creatures themselves. The mystery will probably outlive me. The next generation of researchers will ask the same questions, follow similar paths, reach similar conclusions, or entirely different ones. The Bigfoot will continue to leave footprints and howls and glimpses in the forest, continue to remain just beyond our grasp. And maybe that's exactly how it should be. Maybe some mysteries are meant to persist, some questions are meant to go unanswered, some truths are meant to stay hidden in the deep woods where the wilderness still holds dominion. I still think about that cave, those bones, that moment of standing in what might have been proof of everything I've been searching for. The memory haunts me, drives me forward, reminds me that somewhere out there, the answers exist. We just haven't earned the right to find them yet. And until we do, until we learn to approach the wild with proper respect, until we stop trying to dominate and start trying to understand, the Bigfoot bodies will remain where they have always been, hidden, protected, forever just beyond our reach.